You are 3 hours into a shift that will not remember you. Fluorescent light flattens the office into a single gray note, and the printer 2 desks over jams for the 4th time today, and nobody looks up, and you do not expect them to. The carpet smells faintly of burnt coffee and recycled air, the same smell it has smelled like for 4 years, and somewhere behind you, a manager is congratulating someone else for hitting a number you helped them reach. Your headset is still warm from the call you just finished, a client asking why his reimbursement is taking so long. And you answered him the way you answer everyone, evenly, patiently, invisibly. Then your phone buzzes against your leg, twice, urgent in a way that work never is. It is not a text from a friend. It is a notification from a registered agent in a state you have never visited, confirming that papers were filed an hour ago under a name that is not quite yours, attached to a shell you built 11 months ago out of boredom, and a bank account with $700 in it. The wire cleared. $211,000 just moved through a company no one at this desk has ever heard of. Your hands go cold. Not from fear, from the sudden, total certainty that you are already living 2 lives, and only one of them is visible. 11 months earlier you had $700 and a grudge. The grudge didn't have a single face attached to it. It was smaller and more diffuse than that, the accumulated weight of every performance review that praised your reliability and never once mentioned a raise, every meeting where your name was the one left off the list of people to thank. You'd found the listing on a regional classifieds board nobody under 60 still used, a 14-machine vending route, no website, no LLC, just a widow named Carol trying to liquidate her late husband's business before the storage fees ate what was left. You offered $700 you'd saved from tips and freelance invoices, plus a promise to pay the remaining $2,300 out of the root's own earnings over 4 months. She said yes, because you were polite, and because nobody else called. You didn't tell your roommates. You didn't tell your mother. You opened a single-member LLC through a registered agent 2 states away, gave the business a name that meant nothing, and drove the route yourself on weekends, restocking machines and gas stations and laundromats before anyone at your day job was awake. 4 months later, you sold the route, cleaned up, contracts transferred, 1 new machine added, for $11,400 to a regional operator who never learned your real name. Something sharpened in you that day, a hunger you hadn't expected, cleaner and colder than the anger that had started all of this. That was the first time you wrote down a rule, on the back of a gas receipt, because it felt true enough to keep. If no one can see the structure, no one can attack it. You did not build a business that day. You built a frame, and the frame would hold everything you stacked on top of it later, some of it heavier than you could have imagined at $700. By month 7, the $11,400 was gone. Not spent, deployed. You used it as a down payment on a portfolio of coin-op laundry leases. A divorce was forcing someone to unload fast, structured with seller financing covering the rest. Monthly payments quietly draining out of an account with a name that still meant nothing to anyone. Within weeks the leases were producing enough to cover their own debt and leave a margin. By month's end, the combined value of what you owned, the route's residual contracts, plus the laundry leases, sat at $34,200. You told your coworkers you were doing some freelance stuff on the side. You told your mother nothing. This was rule 2, though you didn't call it that yet. The name on the door is never your name. Every asset you touched went through the same shell, the same registered agent, the same blank mailing address, so that if anyone traced a single thread, it led nowhere near you. Month 13 is when it stopped being a hobby, though you wouldn't admit that for another year. You rolled the vending contracts, the laundry leases, and a small commercial cleaning contract you'd picked up almost by accident into a single holding entity. A roll-up, though you'd only just learned the word, financed almost entirely through seller notes instead of a bank, because a bank asks questions, and a retiring owner just wants his money and his Saturdays back. The combined structure was worth $118,000 by the time the paperwork settled, and none of it had your name attached to a single deed. You started sleeping less, not because the work was hard, but because you couldn't stop running numbers at 1 a.m., couldn't stop refreshing a spreadsheet that meant more to you than most conversations did. You missed Danny's birthday dinner that month for a closing call with a laundromat owner in another state. You told him you had a work thing. He said it was fine. He said it in the specific, careful way people say fine when they've stopped expecting you to show up, and you noticed, and you let the call happen anyway. By month 16, you were quietly worth more than most of the managers at your day job, and you kept driving the same 12-year-old sedan, kept living in the same apartment, with the water stain on the ceiling you'd meant to report for a year. Rule 3, the one you'd absorbed rather than written. Your lifestyle should always underperform your balance sheet. Wealth that shows is wealth that invites questions, and questions are the one expense you refuse to pay. You caught yourself, some mornings on the commute, watching the same tired faces trade 8 hours for a paycheck and feeling something close to contempt, a small, ugly certainty that they were choosing to stay small. It embarrassed you, that feeling. You hadn't earned the right to look down on anyone, not really, not yet, and some nights you lay awake wondering when you'd started measuring people by a number they didn't even know you were calculating. Then came month 19, and the first real threat to the frame. A local blogger, the kind who covered zoning meetings and high school football with equal intensity, noticed that 4 small businesses in the same county had all been quietly bought by LLCs, registered to the same out-of-state agent. She started asking around. She called the vending route's former owner. She called the laundromat's landlord. She was 3 phone calls away from a headline about a mystery buyer hollowing out the town's small businesses. And headlines, once written, cannot be unwritten. You didn't sleep for 4 nights. Your heart did something unfamiliar at 3 a.m. A fast, shallow flutter that sent you to a search engine convinced you were dying instead of simply afraid. You lay in the dark of that same water-stained apartment and understood, for the first time, that the frame you'd built could be seen from the outside if someone stood in the right spot and looked hard enough. You did not panic into the open. You called a lawyer instead, one who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet unwinding, and paid for an hour of her time to restructure the ownership through a second entity in a different state, 1 layer further from your name. You had her draft a short, honest statement, not a lie, just controlled context, describing the entities as a small local investment group reinvesting in struggling Main Street businesses, preserving jobs that would otherwise have closed. You added an indemnification clause to the vending route's original sale, protecting Carol from any liability if questions ever reached her. The blogger ran a mild, almost flattering piece about mysterious local investors saving small businesses. No name, no headline you needed to fear. You had survived it with paperwork, not luck. That became Rule 4, hardened now into something closer to doctrine: never let one deal know the other exists. For weeks after, you flinched at unfamiliar numbers on your phone. You started parking a block away from every closing, out of habit more than logic. That was the fear finding a permanent seat. It didn't fully leave. It just learned to sit quietly in the corner of every future deal, checking exits before you'd even walked in. By month 24, the fear had curdled into something more useful: caution as a system rather than a feeling. You licensed the operating playbook you'd built, the pricing model, the maintenance schedules, the vendor relationships, to 3 independent operators in neighboring counties, taking a minority equity stake in each in exchange for the license instead of demanding outright ownership. It let you scale reach without scaling exposure. The combined structure, licensed arms included, was valued at $612,000 by month's end. Somewhere in there, a relationship had quietly ended, not in an argument, but in the accumulation of canceled dinners and half-answered questions about where you disappeared to on weekends. She'd asked once, gently, if you were seeing someone else. You said no, which was true, and let her believe whatever else she needed to believe, which felt worse than a lie. Month 31 brought the leveraged buyout, a regional vending and laundry distributor 12 times the size of anything you'd bought before, its owner retiring with no successor. You used the cash flow from your existing holdings as collateral against a loan structured through a private lender who didn't care about your age, only your numbers. The acquisition folded 3 more counties into the frame. By the time the debt was serviced and the dust settled, the structure was worth $2.3 million. You stopped telling people you did freelance stuff on the side. You stopped explaining yourself at all. This became Rule 5, the one that cost you the most to learn. The story you don't tell is the only one that can never be used against you. Your mother asked you, over a Sunday phone call you almost let go to voicemail, if you were doing okay financially. She'd noticed you still drove the same car, still lived in the same apartment, and she worried, the way mothers worry about children who seem to be treading water. You told her you were fine. You did not tell her that fine now had 8 figures behind it, because telling her would have meant explaining all of it, and explaining it would have meant admitting how far you'd disappeared from the version of yourself she still pictured. Month 40 is when the outside world finally found you on purpose. A private equity fund with a name you recognized from industry newsletters made an offer to acquire the entire structure outright, $14 million, paid in full, your name on the closing documents for the first time in 3.5 years. It was tempting in a way few things had been. It would have meant an end to the compartmentalizing, the separate entities, the constant low hum of vigilance. You said no to the outright sale, and countered instead. You structured an asset purchase agreement covering 70% of the holdings, with an earnout tied to performance targets over 18 months, keeping a 30% minority stake, and, more importantly, keeping your name off the transaction entirely. The receiving entity was, once again, a structure with a registered agent and no face. Rule 6, unwritten until that negotiation forced it into words, you don't sell control, you rent access to it. By month 47, the earnout targets had been hit and exceeded, and the combined valuation, licensed arms and retained minority stake included, reached $9.8 million. And, by month 54, the fund came back with a final offer to absorb the remaining minority position entirely, folding your frame into a much larger roll-up, preparing to go public within the year. You sold all of it. The vending route that started with 700 and a widow's trust, the laundry leases, the licensing arms, the distributor, the years of driving alone at night to close deals no one at your day job knew existed, all of it, for $41.6 million. You expected the number to feel like something. It didn't, not the way you'd imagined at 1 a.m. over spreadsheets 4 years earlier. You sat in a lawyer's office signing the final asset transfer, and thought, absurdly, of Danny's birthday dinner you'd missed, of a woman who used to ask gentle questions you never fully answered, of your mother's voice on a Sunday call, worrying about a car you'd never bothered to replace. The money could restructure almost anything. It could not go back and sit at that dinner table instead of taking the call. You built a frame nobody could see, and it held everything you asked of it, right up until the moment you realized the one thing it was never built to hold was the people standing outside it, waiting for a version of you that had already moved on. So now you have the number, the frame, the quiet architecture of a life no one around you ever fully saw, and you have the empty chair at a birthday dinner, the questions you let a woman answer for herself, the mother who still doesn't know how far away you actually are. Was the invisibility ever really the strategy, or was it just the first thing to fill the space where you didn't know how to be seen and loved at the same time?